Above the misty Pacific horizon, the whisper of secrecy lingered like a ghost across the islands of Japan. A hush that was almost palpable, hidden in the remote airfields and camouflaged hangars. A machine was born whose very existence struck terror into the hearts of Allied intelligence. A plane that was shrouded in layers of myth, rumor, and fear, whose outlines were whispered in strategic meetings, and whose specifications were guarded like state secrets. And even without ever taking to the skies, this aircraft, a marvel of design, engineering, and cunning, loomed like a phantom menace over the imagination of those who knew of it. A weapon that might never lift from the ground, yet still managed to dominate the mind space of strategists, pilots and spies alike. And as the sun rose over the sprawling forests and coastal cliffs of Japan, casting long shadows across hidden runways, the story begins not with engines roaring or wings slicing through clouds, but with a vision, a plan. A combination of desperation and genius that led to the creation of a plane meant to change the course of war without ever actually flying in battle. And the secrecy surrounding it created a tension so profound that even the most seasoned Allied officers felt a chill when its name surfaced in intercepted communications, reports, and cryptic intelligence briefings. For no one truly knew what to expect, and the unknown, as always, is far more terrifying than reality. And in that single, chilling notion lay the power of this aircraft, a symbol of ingenuity, audacity, and the almost obsessive desire to craft something unprecedented, something that could dominate the skies, or at least dominate the imagination of enemies across the vast Pacific. And as engineers toiled in shadowed workshops, drawing, cutting, testing, discarding, and refining, the plane began to take shape. A combination of cutting-edge aerodynamics, unusual materials, and daring concepts that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in 1940s aviation. And as each piece fell into place, the whispers of Allied intelligence grew louder, speculating on speed, armament, range, maneuverability, and, most importantly, the lethality of a plane that might never even leave the hangar yet could potentially decimate fleets. And the very idea of such an aircraft sparked not just strategic calculations, but fear, paranoia, and a relentless drive to uncover the truth. And in those brief moments, as reconnaissance reports trickled in, the Allies imagined swarms of these machines, dark silhouettes cutting through stormy skies, unstoppable, untouchable, a specter of destruction hovering just out of reach. And yet the reality, hidden behind layers of steel, fabric, and secrecy, was that the plane itself had not flown in combat, had never lifted from the runway under fire, had never been tested against the experienced pilots of the Allied air forces. And yet the myth of terror it invoked was more real than any bullet, bomb, or dogfight, for the human mind is quick to fear the unknown, and intelligence officers, engineers, and strategists obsessed over every scrap of information, every rumor, every coded report, attempting to piece together the capabilities of a plane that remained stubbornly grounded. And in that intense focus, the aircraft transcended mere material existence, becoming a psychological weapon, a tool of dread, a legend in waiting. And as the designers refined its engines, sharpened its wings, and tested prototypes in secret airfields hidden under camouflage netting, they understood that they were crafting more than metal and machinery. They were crafting fear itself, a concept that would haunt enemy officers, pilots, and planners even without a single sortie. And as stories of its specifications spread, its speed, armament, stealth, and advanced aerodynamics rumors multiplied into myths, embellishments, and terrifying speculation. And every intercepted note, every spy report, every whispered conversation added layers to the legend, inflating the perceived threat far beyond what was technically possible. And yet, that perception of power had consequences, shaping strategy, forcing the Allies to divert resources, increase patrols, allocate pilots and aircraft in anticipation of an enemy plane that may never have existed in operational form. And so, the aircraft's power lay not in its physical presence, but in its ability to manipulate belief, perception, and fear, And as Japanese engineers continued work in the shadows, overcoming material shortages, technical limitations, and wartime pressures, they created prototypes that pushed the envelope of design, envisioning capabilities that could challenge the best Allied fighters. And as drawings circulated among top commanders, they marveled at the innovation, the daring, and the audacity of a project that could potentially strike terror into entire squadrons. And in those same moments, the Allies, unaware of the exact details, began to anticipate the worst-case scenarios, conjuring images of aerial dominance, of fleets decimated, of air superiority stolen in a single stroke, and every imagined capability, whether grounded in fact or rumor, was sufficient to alter strategy, divert attention, and change the course of planning. And in that way, a plane that never flew still commanded the skies, still manipulated decisions, still loomed like a phantom over thousands of miles of Pacific theater. And as pilots trained, prepared, and waited for encounters that would never come, intelligence officers pored over reports, maps, and intercepts, trying to reconcile fear with reality, myth with fact, and in doing so, the legend grew. A machine that terrified simply through the power of imagination, secrecy, and human psychology. And as we follow this story deeper, we see the intersections of genius, desperation, and wartime urgency, where engineers pushed boundaries in aerodynamics, materials, and design, imagining a plane capable of feats that, if realized, could have changed the balance of air power in the Pacific. And as every component was fabricated, tested, and modified in secret, the myth became indistinguishable from reality, with Allied planners imagining speed, maneuverability, firepower, and stealth that exceeded anything actually achieved. Yet that terror-shaped operational planning, resource allocation, and the very strategy of entire squadrons. And in this first minute, the hooks are set. The suspense is electric, and the viewer is drawn into a world where a grounded plane, hidden in shadows and secrecy, terrifies empires, manipulates belief, and creates a legend without ever leaving the ground. A story of innovation, secrecy, and psychological warfare that will grip viewers from the very first second, pulling them into the unfolding drama of Japan's secret plane that never flew, yet dominated minds and altered strategy, leaving hearts pounding, imaginations racing, and viewers utterly captivated, unable to look away from a tale where myth becomes reality, fear becomes power, and a machine of steel, wood, and ambition creates suspense, tension, and awe before it even touches the sky. Asterisk as the morning mist lifted, revealing the sprawling airfields hidden among forests, mountains, and coastal cliffs. The plane's partially constructed airframe glinted in the sunlight, a combination of steel, aluminum, and experimental alloys that had been painstakingly sourced despite wartime shortages. And every rivet, every panel, every curve was designed not merely for aerodynamics, but for the projection of power. The embodiment of fear, for its creators understood that perception often outweighed reality in war, and that a single rumor could paralyze entire fleets, dictate strategy, and compel the enemy to act cautiously, diverting attention and resources simply out of fear of the unknown. And as engineers worked tirelessly sketching calculations, testing small models in wind tunnels, and debating the merits of different propulsion systems, a parallel narrative unfolded among Allied intelligence officers thousands of miles away who scoured aerial photographs, intercepted telegrams, and interrogated spies, trying to discern fact from fiction, reality from rumor. For the very existence of such a plane suggested capabilities that could overwhelm Allied forces in that psychological warfare. The plane's true power was realized because even if it never flew, it could influence tactical decisions, redeploy squadrons, and shift the balance of strategic thinking. And as prototypes were assembled, questions of propulsion, fuel efficiency, stability, and armament dominated the workshops, with engineers pushing the limits of metallurgy, engine performance, and aerodynamics to conceive a plane that could theoretically strike fear into the most seasoned Allied pilots. And as these technical marvels took shape, whispers of its potential leaked outward, whether through careless subordinates, intentional disinformation, or intercepted communication. And each snippet of knowledge amplified the myth, creating a machine that existed more vividly in the minds of enemies than in reality. And as Japanese commanders toured the facilities, they marveled at the ingenuity, the audacity, and the sheer scale of ambition, imagining a plane that could achieve unprecedented speed, maneuverability, and firepower. And while the engineers debated the feasibility of certain advanced concepts, including experimental engines, folding wings for rapid deployment, and lightweight armament with concentrated firepower, the very act of envisioning such capabilities contributed to the growing legend. A plane that could strike terror without firing a single shot. And as Allied reconnaissance flights monitored coastal installations, they reported vague shapes, unusual hangars, and ambiguous outlines of aircraft partially obscured by camouflage nets, and each report fed speculation and fear, creating a feedback loop in which the legend of the plane grew exponentially, far exceeding its physical form. And as the war progressed, the Japanese secret aircraft became a fixture in intelligence briefings, war councils, and strategic planning, with Allied officers presenting diagrams of what might be, hypothetical capabilities extrapolated from partial sightings, and worst-case scenarios that anticipated a plane capable of dominating airspace, evading interception, and striking with devastating precision. And all the while, the engineers continued their work, modifying designs, testing components, and refining calculations, balancing ambition with the limitations of contemporary technology. And yet even unfinished prototypes inspired awe, curiosity, and fear, a tangible embodiment of ingenuity and audacity, capable of shaping strategy even in its incomplete state. And as more spy reports trickled in, describing shapes that might be aircraft, engines that might be more powerful than known models, and hangars that might conceal secret prototypes, the Allies prepared for a confrontation that never came, allocating planes, pilots, and resources to counter a threat whose physical reality was far less intimidating than the myth. And in this interplay between imagination and engineering, between rumor and reality, the plane's most terrifying attribute became apparent. It was a weapon of perception, a machine whose primary function was to control thought, induce caution, and amplify fear. And as engineers debated advanced control surfaces, high-altitude stability, and unusual airframe configurations, each theoretical enhancement added another layer to the legend, fueling the narrative of an aircraft that could have dominated the skies even if it remained grounded. And as test models were examined, painted and partially assembled, Allied analysts interpreted every detail as confirmation of exceptional capabilities. And in doing so, the myth became self-sustaining, a force that shaped decision-making far beyond the limits of its physical presence. And as the Japanese workshops produced blueprints, scale models, and incomplete prototypes, their creators understood that the plane's greatest power might not be realized in combat, but in the fear it inspired, the uncertainty it created, and the tactical caution it forced upon enemies who never knew when, where, or even if it might appear. And as pilots trained in conventional aircraft imagined facing this phantom adversary, the psychological burden intensified. Every sortie potentially confronting a machine whose capabilities were imagined to exceed any known aircraft. And that tension, that dread, became a strategic advantage, shaping deployment, patrols, and engagement rules, demonstrating that war is fought as much in the mind as in the air. And as the construction continued, with engineers overcoming shortages of materials, experimenting with unconventional alloys, and innovating engine designs that flirted with theoretical limits, the plane's legend grew, each advancement, no matter how minor, magnified by secrecy and speculation. And as intelligence networks reported unusual activity around airfields, Allied planners interpreted it as proof of a breakthrough, reinforcing the aura of invincibility surrounding the aircraft. And even as the plane remained grounded, unfinished and untested in combat, its strategic effect was undeniable, shaping behavior, provoking caution, and dominating thought. and in that first minute of narrative. The story's hooks are fully embedded, suspense is maximized, and viewers are drawn into the paradoxical drama of a plane that terrorized without ever flying. Combining history, engineering, psychology, and wartime secrecy into a seamless narrative that grips, thrills, and immerses, compelling the audience to watch, imagining every detail, fearing every rumor, and marveling at the audacity of a project whose influence transcended reality, dominating minds, shaping strategy, and defining an entire chapter of aerial warfare before it ever left the ground. A story of invention, ambition, and the terrifying power of imagination in wartime, leaving hearts racing, eyes wide, and viewers completely captivated as the days and weeks progressed. The secret plane became more than just metal, and design it became an obsession, a focal point of strategy and imagination for every minor sighting. Every scrap of intercepted communication and every reconnaissance photograph was scrutinized with almost fanatical attention, and Allied intelligence officers pored over maps, hangar layouts, and even the shadows cast by incomplete prototypes each angle. Each measurement extrapolated into imagined capabilities, turning rumor into operational planning, speculation into perceived threat, and in this psychological arms race, the plane's power was magnified, for the fear it instilled shaped decision-making in ways no gun, bomb, or engine could, and as engineers continued their clandestine work, testing engines in secret tunnels to muffle the roar, experimenting with high-strength lightweight alloys scavenged from unconventional sources, and debating the aerodynamics of wings that might provide unprecedented lift and speed, they were unknowingly contributing to a legend that had already surpassed the tangible aircraft itself. And as design sketches multiplied, depicting airframes that could theoretically exceed the performance of any Allied fighter, the imagination of the enemy filled in the gaps, projecting capabilities far beyond reality, and in doing so created a plane that, for all intents and purposes, already dominated the Pacific skies without a single engine ever fully ignited in combat. And as technicians assembled partial fuselages, meticulously balancing weight, stress distribution, and theoretical aerodynamics, rumors of the plane's armament circulated, with intelligence imagining machine guns, cannons, or even experimental weapons capable of altering the calculus of dogfights. And every imagined specification added to the aura of invincibility, shaping strategy, tactics, and the expectations of pilots and commanders alike. And as more spies reported fleeting glimpses of covered hangars, night flights for engine tests, or unusual aircraft silhouettes, the Allies interpreted them as confirmation of extraordinary speed, stealth, and maneuverability, building a mental picture of a machine capable of eluding interception and striking decisively. And in that interplay between reality and imagination, the secret plane achieved a kind of immortality, dominating minds and shaping decisions in ways that no material aircraft could. And as Japanese engineers and planners debated deployment strategies, possible ranges, fuel efficiency, and the theoretical effectiveness of their design against existing Allied aircraft, the tension between ambition and feasibility became apparent. For while materials were scarce, engines untested, and aerodynamics only partially understood, the vision of a plane that could terrorize fleets without leaving the ground drove innovation, pushing designers to explore unconventional solutions, to calculate risks that would normally be unacceptable, and to challenge assumptions about what was possible in aviation. And as scale models were tested in wind tunnels, engineers observed airflow, stability, and structural integrity, meticulously documenting results, debating improvements, and adjusting calculations, all while maintaining absolute secrecy, knowing that a single leak could compromise the project and dissipate the psychological asterisk advantage they sought. And as intelligence reports accumulated, each speculation about speed, firepower, and stealth multiplied, creating a machine that existed more vividly in the enemy's mind than in reality. And that perception alone influenced deployments, patrol patterns, and combat readiness. A demonstration of how fear, imagination, and secrecy can become weapons as powerful as any physical armament, And as the secret aircraft project progressed, the Allied forces began to prepare for a confrontation that would never come, allocating squadrons, modifying training, and adjusting strategy to counter a threat that remained grounded, incomplete, and untested. Yet in the minds of planners, engineers, and pilots, it represented a potentially unstoppable force, capable of dominating airspace and striking decisively. In every rumor, every intercepted communication, and every imagined capability added weight to this phantom menace, shaping the course of operations, compelling caution, and instilling respect tinged with terror. And as the Japanese engineers continued to refine their design, debating fuel ratios, wing profiles, propeller configurations, and engine placement, the work became both meticulous and urgent, aware that every day brought new constraints, changing material availability and the constant threat of discovery. And yet their ambition remained undeterred, fueled by the knowledge that even an aircraft that never flew could have profound strategic consequences, and as hangars filled with partially constructed airframes, prototypes, and experimental components. The tension in the workshops mirrored the tension in Allied command centers thousands of miles away, where reports were interpreted, plans revised, and contingencies expanded to account for the worst-case scenario. And in this interplay between myth and reality, fear and innovation, the plane's legend solidified, proving that sometimes the most terrifying weapon is the one that exists more vividly in imagination than in action. And as technicians tested control surfaces, adjusted rudder response, and evaluated wing flexibility, every minor observation became a critical point in the mental map of engineers, a chain of cause and effect that could determine the theoretical survivability, maneuverability, and combat effectiveness of an aircraft that might never fly. And as Allied intelligence attempted to decode the significance of unusual construction materials, the orientation of airfields, and the timing of test activities, they only reinforced the myth, imagining capabilities beyond reality, and the plane became both symbol and specter, influencing planning, operations, and perception, shaping not only potential engagements but also the psychological readiness of pilots and commanders. And in this first minute of narrative, the story has already set suspenseful hooks, drawing the viewer into a world where secrecy, fear, and imagination combine to create tension, wonder, and fascination, compelling them to imagine a plane that never flew, yet terrorized entire fleets, dominated strategic thinking, and became a legend through the audacity of its design, the meticulousness of its engineers, and the power of its myth, leaving viewers captivated, enthralled, and fully immersed in the unfolding drama of Japan's secret plane, a tale of ambition, fear, innovation, and psychological warfare that grips from the very first moment, building anticipation, awe, and relentless curiosity that will carry them through the next sequences of the story. As the aircraft's legend continues to unfold in ways that defy expectation, dominate imagination, and demonstrate that sometimes the most powerful weapon in war is not a machine in the sky, but the idea of one, a phantom capable of shaping minds' strategy. In history, without ever leaving the ground, asterisk as months passed, the secret aircraft became more than a machine. It became a symbol, an almost mythical figure looming over Allied planning, as every rumor, every sighting, and every fragment of intelligence added layers to its legend. In engineers, working in hidden hangars, meticulously assembled components with precision, each panel, engine part, and control surface, reflecting painstaking calculations. And while the engines remained untested in combat and prototypes largely incomplete, the mere possibility of their capabilities drove strategic decisions across vast oceans, influencing patrol routes, airfield defenses, and the allocation of squadrons. And as reconnaissance planes circled Japanese coastal airfields, spotting indistinct shapes obscured by camouflage and mist, Allied analysts projected staggering capabilities, imagining speeds, maneuverability, armament, and stealth that far exceeded any known aircraft. And each speculation became a tactical problem, forcing generals to plan for scenarios that might never exist. And in this delicate balance of imagination and engineering, the plane achieved its first true victory, not in the skies, but in the minds of the enemy, dominating their decisions, shaping their perceptions, and proving that fear itself can be weaponized, even when the weapon never fires a shot. And as engineers experimented with theoretical propulsion systems, high-performance alloys, and aerodynamic configurations, they pushed boundaries that conventional wisdom deemed impossible. Yet each innovation, no matter how minor or untested, added to the aura of the aircraft, further cementing its mythos. And as Allied intelligence intercepted fragmented communications, ambiguous reports, and contradictory accounts from spies and reconnaissance missions, they stitched these together into a narrative of a plane so advanced, so fast, and so deadly that it could theoretically overwhelm any squadron. And this narrative, amplified by rumor, speculation, and imagination, became more potent than any material plane. And as Japanese commanders reviewed design proposals, debated deployment strategies, and considered theoretical operational capabilities, they understood that even in its incomplete state, the aircraft exerted strategic influence, a ghostly presence that shaped the battlefield without ever appearing in it. And as technicians conducted structural stress tests, examined prototype fuselages, and adjusted wing geometries to optimize theoretical lift and stability, each technical refinement added weight to the legend, fueling both awe and fear. And as Allied planners revised patrol patterns, considered alternate routes, and staged forces to counter a threat that remained grounded, the aircraft's influence became tangible, real, and undeniable, demonstrating that perception can rival reality in power. And as the months turned to years, the legend grew further, fed by continued secrecy, intermittent sightings, and the human tendency to fill gaps in knowledge with the most terrifying possibilities. And the aircraft, though never fully operational, never flown in combat, and never tested against enemy pilots, dominated the strategic imagination of Allied commanders, pilots, and intelligence officers. And in this interplay of myth and reality, secrecy and speculation, the plane's power transcended material existence, influencing decisions, shaping deployments, and altering the course of planning. For war is fought as much in the mind as in the skies. And a phantom can be as deadly as a bullet if belief in it is strong enough. And as engineers debated armament configurations, control surfaces, and theoretical performance envelopes, the aircraft took on a life beyond its physical form, becoming a symbol of audacity, innovation, and psychological mastery, capable of intimidating opponents and shaping strategy through fear alone. And as reconnaissance flights reported ambiguous shadows, hangars, and partial fuselages, the Allies interpreted these as confirmation of extraordinary capabilities, further solidifying the plane's myth. And in doing so, it became a weapon in a war of perception, with each rumor, report, or imagined ability increasing its potency, influencing decisions, and ensuring caution. And as the narrative unfolds, the first-minute hook continues, drawing viewers into a world where a grounded aircraft terrifies without firing a shot, dominating both imagination and strategy, compelling full immersion in a story of genius, secrecy, and audacity, where the human mind becomes the battlefield and perception itself is a weapon. And as technical diagrams, partially built prototypes, and innovative concepts circulated among Japanese engineers, their work became a testament to ingenuity, pushing the boundaries of materials, aerodynamics, and theoretical performance. And yet, it was the perception of the enemy that amplified their efforts, turning speculation into strategy, imagination into caution, and rumors into decisive planning. And as pilots trained under the specter of this phantom plane, their anticipation, fear, and psychological stress reflected the aircraft's most powerful capability, which was not to fly, fight, or shoot, but to dominate minds, control thought, and shape behavior across vast distances, influencing every move, every strategy, and every contingency. And as this interplay of myth, secrecy, and technical ambition intensified, the plane's legend became unstoppable, a a machine whose presence was felt in strategy rooms, airfields, and the hearts of enemy pilots. A symbol of audacity, invention, and psychological warfare, and as the story continues, the suspense, tension, and engagement deepen, compelling viewers to remain riveted, imagining every sighting, every rumor, every technical detail, and every potential capability of a plane that, though it never flew in combat, remains one of the most terrifying and fascinating concepts of World War II aviation, leaving audiences captivated, enthralled, and fully immersed in a narrative where imagination, secrecy, and innovation converge to create fear, suspense, and awe. And in the crescendo of the first-minute sequence, viewers are left on the edge of their seats, heart racing, mind racing, and eyes glued, fully aware that the most terrifying weapon in this story is not the aircraft itself, but the legend it inspires, the psychological grip it exerts, and the suspense it creates from the very first moment, ensuring complete engagement for the unfolding saga of Japan's secret plane that terrified the Allies, without ever lifting off the ground, as the secret aircraft neared what could have been a prototype stage. The combination of secrecy, technical ingenuity, and psychological warfare reached a fever pitch. For every partially assembled fuselage, every covered wing, every engine tested in isolation contributed not just to the physical construction, but to an almost intangible aura of fear, anticipation, and strategic dominance. And while the plane itself never left the hangar in a combat sortie, its influence soared across thousands of miles of Pacific theater, dictating decisions, diverting resources, and shaping operations purely through the threat of its potential. And as engineers debated theoretical modifications, from fuel efficiency at high altitudes to the feasibility of pressurized cockpits, advanced weaponry, and high-speed aerodynamics, the plane became a symbol of the impossible, an embodiment of ambition, and a testament to the human capacity to innovate under pressure. And as Allied intelligence intercepted ambiguous signals, analyzed aerial reconnaissance photographs showing indistinct shadows, and compiled fragmented eyewitness accounts, each piece of data was interpreted through a lens of fear and imagination, building a mental image of an aircraft so advanced, so fast, so deadly, that it could theoretically dominate skies and fleets alike. And in doing so, the plane transcended its material form, existing instead as a psychological weapon, shaping strategy, tactics, and the very behavior of pilots, planners, and commanders who anticipated a confrontation that would never arrive. And as technicians refined control surfaces, adjusted wing curvature, experimented with engines, and calculated structural integrity, the aircraft's design became a masterpiece of theoretical aviation, pushing boundaries that the period's technology could scarcely support. Yet these innovations only amplified its legend, and as rumors of its speed, maneuverability, and armament proliferated among Allied circles, they provoked reallocation of squadrons, modification of patrol patterns, and intense operational planning to counter a threat that remained grounded, unfinished, and untested. And in this remarkable interplay between myth and reality, perception became the plane's greatest weapon. And as Japanese engineers completed partial prototypes, optimized aerodynamics in wind tunnels, and debated innovative materials, the aircraft's legend solidified, proving that fear, imagination, and secrecy can rival bullets, engines, or bombs in shaping the course of warfare. And as reconnaissance continued, ambiguous sightings, misinterpreted shadows, and partial fuselage outlines reinforced Allied assumptions of extraordinary capabilities, ensuring that caution dominated strategy and every hypothetical enhancement, from stealth-like profiles to high-powered engines, contributed to the ever-growing aura. Even as the plane itself never achieved operational flight, and as planners, intelligence officers, and pilots contemplated its potential, the psychological weight of the aircraft influenced decision-making more than any physical test or engagement could, demonstrating that the human mind can be as much a battlefield as the skies themselves. And as technicians continued to assemble engines, fuselages, and partial wings, balancing theoretical aerodynamics, control, responsiveness, and fuel efficiency. The process itself became part of the legend, each calculation, adjustment, and improvement magnified in imagination. And as intelligence reports trickled in describing hangar activity, covered prototypes, and the unusual timing of engine tests, analysts interpreted these as confirmation of capabilities beyond reality, feeding the myth, reinforcing fear, and shaping strategic choices. And as months passed, the aircraft's influence expanded beyond technical and tactical considerations, impacting the morale of Allied pilots, the planning of entire fleets, and the prioritization of reconnaissance, maintenance, and resource allocation, all based on a plane that never flew in combat, yet dominated minds with the intensity of a battlefield legend. And as the narrative unfolds, the suspense hooks the viewer from the very first minute, immersing them in a world where secrecy, imagination, and innovation converge to create terror without a single shot fired. And as the engineers pushed theoretical boundaries, modified partial prototypes, and debated unprecedented technologies, the plane's legend grew. A phantom capable of shaping strategy, perception, and behavior in ways far beyond its tangible form. And as Allied officers adjusted tactics, rerouted patrols, and prepared for an engagement that would never happen, the psychological power of the aircraft became undeniable, proving that the greatest weapon is not always firepower or speed, but the fear it inspires, the caution it imposes, and the imagination it dominates. And as the story builds, suspense escalates, hooks tighten, and the audience is drawn into every shadowed hangar, every secret test, every whispered report, and every technical marvel experiencing the tension, anticipation, and awe as if they themselves were pilots, engineers, or intelligence officers navigating the uncertainty, risk, and audacity of a project that redefined the boundaries of psychological warfare. And as the first minute hook concludes, the plane stands not as a machine of war, but as a testament to innovation, secrecy, and the extraordinary power of human imagination, leaving viewers enthralled, hearts racing, and eyes glued to the screen, fully captivated by the legend of Japan's secret aircraft that terrified the Allies without ever flying. A story of ambition, genius, fear, and the intangible supremacy of perception over reality, setting the stage for the next points in the narrative where deeper technical intrigue, wartime strategies, and legendary myths will continue to engage, amaze, and shock audiences, ensuring they remain riveted for the entire unfolding saga, fully immersed in one of World War II's most fascinating untold stories.